Welcome to the sixth annual Parent Network Workshop. We are pleased to have you join us for Beyond Sticker Charts and Treasure Boxes, Considering Mental Health in Behavior Plans. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping items. If you have questions during the session, please use the Q&A feature that is located in the Zoom bar. And if in the coming days, actually, we will be posting this recording to our website, along with the slides and any links we talk about. So feel free to check back and share those slides and email and that video with anyone you think that it would help. And that is at idahoparentnetwork.org. So I want to introduce you quickly to our presenters today. We have Tricia Ellinger, a parent from the Idaho Parent Network. We also have Dr. Charlie Silva, who is the Director of Special Education with the Idaho State Department of Education. Then we have Audrey Kennedy, who is the Behavioral Coordinator at the Idaho Special Education Support and Technical Assistance Group, which is SESTA. And then myself, I'll be joining this session today. Our learning objectives, participants will be familiar with the process of creating a behavior plan. We'll understand how behavior plans can be used to support children with mental health concerns, and we will know how to advocate to include mental health supports in the creation of a behavior plan. So go ahead and Tricia, go ahead and take it away.
Great. So a behavior plan is a tool that schools, teachers, and support staff use to assist a child with challenging or maladaptive behaviors to succeed, essentially. It can be formal, it can be informal. I know as a school counselor in the past that kids who did not have IEPs, I personally was responsible for creating positive behavioral support plans with a team. You know, we just used everybody. So it's supportive in nature. It's to reduce maladaptive behaviors, increase skills, and to support the child. So that's really what a behavior plan is. And you don't have to be on an IEP to get one. You don't have to be on a 504. So it is something available to everyone if a child is not succeeding in school.
So I wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about what a behavior intervention plan actually is. I think there's a common belief or misconception that a behavior plan is the goal is to change the student, change their behavior, make the behavior stop, and it's all about the student. In reality, behavior is a result of our environment, and the adults are part of that environment. So the behavior intervention plan really outlines what the adults are going to do in the environment to support the student with challenging behavior. So your behavior intervention plan should include how adults are going to prevent challenging behavior and create a supportive environment, how adults are going to help teach new skills and behaviors to the student, and how adults are going to respond to both the challenging behavior and the new skills and behaviors that we are teaching, how they're going to reinforce and continue to bring those out and build skills.
Audrey, I really appreciate that you pointed out that this is what the adults are going to do, because I have sat in many behavior intervention plan meetings in my time, and I never knew that. I always had this plan presented to me as how my kid was going to behave differently. And this was a fancy little tool so that we could track whether or not he was doing what we wanted him to do with his behavior. I think it would have made the team substantially more collaborative and definitely more effective had I known as a parent that this whole plan was for us as the adults to figure out how to best support the child. I really wish that's how they told me. So I'm glad that you are, and I hope that everyone who's listening and those who look at these resources understand that if they can walk into that meeting knowing that this is a collaborative adult process so that we can support the child for success, I think that that changes the tone of the entire conversation from the beginning, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and Laura, I just want to interject here and say, well, first of all, thank you for sharing your perspective, but also to thank the Idaho Parent Network for allowing Audrey and I to come and collaborate with you all so that other parents don't have this experiences that you had. The beauty of this presentation and our collaboration is that we want to empower parents and service providers to say, yeah, you have a voice at the table and this is really what it's about. So again, thank you for including us. And again, we want one of the many goals to be that other parents don't have to go through what you and possibly Tricia have gone through in the past.
Thanks, Charlie. It's, it's always delightful to have a conversation with you. I mean, when I think, gosh, I've done it all, then you're like, it's not supposed to work that way. And I'm like, what? So it's always lovely to actually find out that things should be better than that I may have experienced, and that you're willing to have a conversation about that. So thank you.
All right, well, I'm going to continue on then. And Tricia made this point when she introduced the topic of pointing out, which is a really critical point, that a student doesn't have to be on an IEP in order to benefit from some individualized planning or to be offered, in this case, a behavior intervention plan. Any student who is struggling with behavior, really needs to have that addressed by, as Audrey mentioned, the adults in the schools, in collaboration with the family and in collaboration with other people that have expertise regarding that child or that child's behavior. In addition, though, if there is an IEP team, then the BIP team includes those members. So it really should be part of that individualized education plan. And
when we say BIP, that's a behavior intervention plan. It rolls off our tongue.
Yeah, it does,
doesn't
it? Yes, it does. In other cases, the team typically includes, parents and, as I mentioned, the educators throughout the school environment. But don't overlook our service providers. Sometimes we think, oh, well, I don't need the speech language pathologist there because, they just do speech. Well, they do a lot more than speech, and they do a lot with language. And we know that language is very much connected to behavior. So that's just an example of a service provider that may be appropriate to bring to the team. Otherwise, you really just want to have all the experts there so that you can come together and really formulate a plan that's going to assist the adults and students.
So Charlie, if a family wants a behavior plan, they think one's needed, but the people at the school have not brought it up, how are they supposed to ask for it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Laura. And they can do it in a number of ways. And it really is somewhat contingent on the school that the child's enrolled in. But you can start with your counselor. Tricia, I'm sure in her many years of working as a counselor, has had probably lots of parents come in and say, I have some concerns. What do I need to do? Then Tricia will know the structure or the system within that school. Maybe they have a problem solving team. Maybe they have a problem solving team that they call something different. But either way, or sometimes you go to the principal, you go to whomever you really, I think, feel comfortable having a conversation with. That's the starting point.
So, I mean, I know in IEP teams, if we bring notes from the doctor, it's taken under consideration as part of the team discussion. Is it the same thing with a behavior intervention, plan meeting? And I mean, can I bring other people if, someone knows my kid really well, if a provider or, the neighbor, someone who's able to get this to work well? And can I bring them to the meeting and say, hey, this person has some ideas, or is this a school and parents type of thing?
No, it's parents can bring whomever they feel comfortable bringing to the table. What is best protocol is to always, though, give a heads up to the school team, just as the school should be giving parents a heads up as to who is going to be at the table. I don't know about you all, but I'm not a big fan of surprises. I like to know what I'm getting into so I can be very prepared. And I think it's just a courtesy that we should be affording all people. But no, you can bring whomever you want. And yes, the team will consider all documents. That consideration per se is not unique to IDEA. That consideration or the concept of consideration is regarding everything. Does that help, Laura?
It does. And for the parents who don't know what IDEA is, that is the governing statutes on the federal side that handle special education and the IEP process. So I know that's another acronym that we just use and forget that everyone doesn't walk around using it every day.
That's right. and every meeting needs a Laura who will keep us honest and acronym free.
Oh, it's impossible in education. You know how long we would spend just restating the same thing if we didn't use acronyms? Oh my.
Yeah. And at this point, I really would like Audrey to continue the conversation about the behavior intervention plan. She truly is the expert, as well as all of us, but she has spent her professional career really becoming an expert in the area of behavior.
So a behavior intervention plan should be built around data. We make data-based decisions about the interventions and strategies that are going to be included in our behavior intervention plan. And so there's two common questions that get asked around the data that's going to be in an intervention plan. And the first one is, where does it come from, right? And the answer to that is there's a couple different sources in which we can pull data from to create our behavior intervention plan. Observations and what we call ABC data. So that means we observe the environment and we make note of what's happening right before the behavior, what happens during the behavior, and what happens after. That's a rich source for data. We also can conduct interviews with key team members, including parents, including teachers, including related service providers, to gather information about why the behavior is happening, what's happening around the behavior. There's questionnaires and surveys. Those are really rich sources of data. And I know kind of Charlie mentioned earlier that we can bring outside team members. And so there could potentially be really rich outside data also that parents or teams should be very happy to receive and incorporate into the assessment that contributes to the behavior intervention plan. One of the second questions that gets asked frequently about our data is, how much do we need? How many sources of data and how long do we collect data for? And to be candid, that's going to depend, because every student is different. Every student's behavior might look a little bit different and their needs are a little bit different. So if you have a student or your child is exhibiting maybe pretty severe or dangerous behavior, we're not going to wait weeks until we collect a lot of data before we put an intervention plan in place. We're going to make some decisions with the information that we currently have in order to, like we said earlier, kind of prevent the behavior from happening and set the student up for success, in order to start teaching them some new skills, and so that everybody knows how to respond to that behavior. And in the meantime, we can be collecting some more data and meet again and make some modifications to that plan as necessary as we get more information. More data is always better, but if we have some dangerous behavior, some severe behavior, we don't want to wait until it's too late. We don't want to wait until our student has an opportunity to practice all these maybe more dangerous or severe behaviors, or wait until they fail before we can start putting some supports in place.
So I'll just have to tell you that, you know, my son, early into this process for us, we had, you know, one of these meetings scheduled to handle this and to come up with stuff. And yes, they wanted to collect more data, but the nature of my son's mental health issues is cyclical. So we'll have good days and we have bad days, and then we have good days and we have bad days. So we met on a bad day. Everyone agreed we needed some solutions, some supports. And then 3 days later, I got a call from the administrator letting me know that my son was cured. everything was great. Behaviors were fine. No more plans were needed. And I remember asking if he understood the definition of bipolar. And, like, they're not always going to be one way or the other. And he's like, well, the data says we're fine. And I said, I think we need to continue to support said child while we gather more data. And I think that is one of those misconceptions that we have with behavior plans, that, if the behavior's here today and gone tomorrow, we're good. And I think we want there to be progress. That's something that we're hoping for. We're all hoping that there's going to be progress, but that doesn't mean that we need to, scrap the behavior plan or wait until the kid has failed so many times that we're sure they're going to keep redoing it. Because as you said, we don't want them to practice the things that we do not want them to do. But I was just really surprised, and I kind of chuckled. When he declared my son cured, I didn't say it to him, but what I was thinking is, ooh, if it gets out that this school can cure bipolar, everybody's moving here. I mean, and shockingly enough, it wasn't done. We had to use the plan some more, and I'm sure he was a little surprised. But I just think it's important that when we have a pushback from schools and they say, we don't have enough data, that it's okay for parents to say, okay, then let's get our temporary plan in place to head this off while we collect more data. We're happy to meet again. And that's something we can say. And
Laura, that's absolutely correct. That is something parents can and should say if it's appropriate. And I'm glad you brought it up, because that needs to be a key takeaway for those participating right now. While the school may feel that they need more data, and while that may be very appropriate, you must remember that you need to continue to support that child while you're gathering more data. And that goes for behavior, but it also goes for academics. It goes for anything. If you have a child struggling, we don't just say, oh, let's wait. Let's get to the six weeks or the 8 weeks, and you'll hear these different numbers thrown out there. And it's like, how about we come up with, like you said, Laura, kind of a temporary plan as we collect more data, and then reevaluate once we have more information to pull from. But the end goal must be, we have to support the child.
Well, and then when we're dealing with mental health, we may see cyclical stuff where we go through periods of intense behaviors, and then we have a sweet spot in the middle where it looks great. And that's data. I mean, I always would tell people that's data collection too.
Absolutely.
The fact that they're doing great right now, let's collect all the data we can on what great looks like. Because if we're not great, now we know what we're going for. And
sure.
And I even had someone once asked to say to me, well, we tried to do an assessment, but he refused to finish it, so we don't have any data. And I said, the fact that he wouldn't do it, is that not data? And they went,
correct.
Oh yeah. I'm like, he can't take the assessment. That's a data point. Oh, it was definitely a light bulb moment for that person. Who's like, oh, lack of ability, that's data. Yes, it is. So,
well, go ahead, Tricia.
I just wanted to speak to the data point. So our school, and often in the school that I worked at, we're looking at they kind of like use 6 weeks as a data, as a goal. What are we looking at? Can we see a pattern? Do we see some stabilization? What was happening on those days when they were stable? My kids are dually diagnosed with DD and mental health issues. So what are we seeing that's happening that we really want to emphasize those stable days, what was different on those days? And so looking at all the data points, so as what we totally failed or we totally succeeded, but what were we doing during those stable days or time periods, like you said, sweet spot, what was happening completely all together. So his medication was working and support staff was working and the environment was calm and helped him succeed academically. So we really want to we looked at 6 weeks, but oftentimes you'll say at 3 weeks, this is not working. We need to come back and tweak some things. And it's not a major meeting. It's a phone call and an email exchange that says, can we tweak this? We want to try this. And so it doesn't have to be a whole major meeting when you're adding or subtracting from your BIP. It can be a fluid document.
And with the data collection, I think it's just critical that we have really good collaboration with all of the professionals working with that child. And the reason I say that, and many of you experience it on a daily basis, is a student who has some mental health concerns, maybe are having some medications that they're taking. They may be participating in a very specific type of behavior or counseling program outside of school. They may be participating in some related services therapies outside of school. And really, in order to do justice for the child, all those people and all that rich data needs to be brought to the table. And
Yes.
to really, like you were saying, Tricia, I mean, if there's a med change, right?
Mhm.
We know that is going to impact things. So how does it impact? What are we going to do with it? That's just really, really valuable information that needs to be shared and used appropriately.
Correct.
All right, well, what I have up on there, what we have up on the screen is the Behavior Intervention Plan, the BIP Quick Guide. We have through SESTA, the Special Education Support and Technical Assistance here at BSU, they have made a lot of what we are calling quick guides. These are 1 to 2 page just little cheat sheets, so to speak. So everything that we have covered thus far regarding behavior intervention plans right here. So you can see, just to begin, does the student need an IEP in order to have a behavior intervention plan? We provide the answer, no, and then we provide the justification. But we wanted to include these resources because we know sometimes when we do these presentations, we can overwhelm our participants. It's not intentional. We just really want to get everything we know out and available to folks. And then we realize, oh gosh, that was a lot of information. So we just really wanted to include these quick guides so that when it's all said and done and you're getting ready to go to your school to potentially have a conversation about a behavior intervention plan, take a minute, read this document, better yet, bring it to the team meeting. So just wanted to share that.
And that resource will be linked on the Parent Network website after the presentation. You guys can also go to your website and do a search for it, can't you, Charlie?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
All right, so we talked a lot about data and data-based decisions and how we support our behavior intervention plan with data, but there's a process before we create a behavior intervention plan where we gather a lot of rich information so that our behavior intervention plan is effective. And that's called the functional behavior assessment. Laura, do you mind going to the next?
Oops, it jumped. Hold on. There you go.
Thank you. So functional behavior assessment, or in other words, an FBA, one of those other acronyms that we throw around there, is to really illuminate and understand the underlying reason or purpose for some of the challenging behavior. So we kind of can look at behavior as having 3 main principles or laws to it, right? So behavior is learned. It usually comes from the environment. One way or another, we learn that this behavior is going to help me get my needs met, right? And it's purposeful. So there's a reason why it's happening. I have an unmet need, and this behavior is helping me meet that need. And it continues because it's working. And so the whole point of an FBA is to figure out and understand what that unmet need is and how we can help the individual meet it in another way. So when we conduct a functional behavior assessment, it will result in identifying one of those 4 main needs or purposes. We call those functions for the challenging behavior. And the four main underlying functions or purposes or needs we can remember by the acronym SEAT. And so the first one is sensory, which means the individual has some sort of sensory need. I'm engaging in challenging behavior because I need to avoid something sensory. Maybe there's something overstimulating, a lot of loud noises or lights. Or maybe I'm deprived of something sensory related and I'm looking for some sensory input. That's one purpose or function. We might also engage in challenging behavior to escape or avoid something scary, something that is maybe increasing our anxiety or is a little triggering to us from a past trauma perspective, something that's non-preferred or aversive. We might also engage in behavior to get social reinforcement. We call this attention, but I like to just call it social reinforcement. When we say, oh, they're just doing that for attention, it kind of gives it a little bit of a negative connotation, or we think that that's a less valid reason for engaging in challenging behavior. But the reality is we're all human and we're all very social beings, and we all engage in behavior to get social reinforcement all day, every day. So that's the third reason or purpose or need. And then the last one is what we call tangible. It just means I'm engaging in a behavior to get access to a preferred item or event, right? And so the beauty of the FBA and these four main functions is it can kind of help us objectively look at why behavior is happening. So you might have behavior that looks similar. We have an example of Josh and Jason up here. Both have some challenging behaviors. Both of their behavior looks like calling out in class, making silly jokes, some off-topic comments, but they could be doing it for different reasons. In this instance, both are rooted in a need for attention, social reinforcement. Josh, however, has a history of trauma and neglect. So how his team intervenes and starts to plan and develop an intervention plan is going to look very different, because he maybe has some additional mental health concerns, right? He has this history of trauma. So we might not want to say, oh, he's doing it for attention, we're just going to ignore him, because that could be really re-triggering, really re-traumatizing. We want to say, geez, Josh, how can we meet your need for this social reinforcement ahead of time and teach you how to meet that need yourself? And so the beauty of the functional behavior assessment, sometimes when we reduce these purposes or needs to sensory or escape or attention or tangible, it feels like not enough. Like, well, it can't just be that. But the beauty is that it empowers us to look at the environment and how we can change the environment. Talk about that in the next slide, if you don't mind, Laura.
But before you go on, Audrey, I want to just bring up 2 points. One is you talk about in your example of a student who may have some trauma or neglect. This is a great time to just talk about the importance of having really good communication and dialogue between home and school, because the school may not know about the trauma or neglect, right? And really, in order for Audrey or whomever who's going to come in and do a functional behavior assessment, they need to know that information, because that is going to change the course of action potentially significantly. So just sharing, and I know it's really, really hard for families to share some really personal information and whatnot, but in order to really come up with a robust plan, we have to have all that information available to us so that we can make the appropriate plan. So I'm really glad you brought that up in the example. I think that's critical. The second thing that Audrey said that I really, really like is we always talk about attention, and it's like Audrey said, oh, they're just doing it for attention. They're doing it for attention. And somehow we just minimize it just by saying that word in and of itself. Oh, they're just getting attention. But if we reframe it, right, and we talk about it as social reinforcement, it's like, oh, well,
Yes.
what's being reinforced, right? It gets us to take a step back and look at it maybe a little differently than just brushing it aside and saying, oh, it's just attention. So I really appreciate that you brought those up.
Well, and I think it's important for us to know that, like you pointed out, Audrey, if the child is seeking attention because he's trying to make himself feel more comfortable or confident because of a past trauma trigger, and ignoring was part of the past trauma, you ignoring it now is not going to make it better. They're going to find other ways to get that attention. And I know with my son, his need was to feel safe. That was his underlying need. And so the things he did, he escaped to feel safe. And that escape sometimes looked like hiding under a desk. It sometimes looked like running down the halls. And unfortunately, sometimes it also looked like running into traffic. You would think that being safe would not be in front of us of a truck, but coming down the road. But for him, safety was not in the school. And so instead of them focusing on keeping him in the building, they focused on making him feel safe. And all of a sudden, he didn't feel the need to leave the building because safety was inside the building now. And so while he may still leave the classroom, we worked on, hey, I need to leave for a moment. Okay, and then where are you going? And, we figured that out. And so it was really the team understanding there was a mental health component to this driving need to feel safe that made it, he wasn't running away because he wanted people to chase him.
Well, and possibly, you were, Charlie, you were talking about trauma, and if your school is not a trauma-informed school, there are plenty of trainings and videos and things that a team can look at to recognize what being trauma-informed means. It doesn't mean you have to become a trauma expert. Just being trauma-informed and educating yourself about how to help these kids feel secure, feel safe, and to avoid triggers is super important. And I just can't say enough that I think that having our world having gone through the COVID pandemic has been traumatizing. The loss of socialization in school, the social distancing that we were going through, that can be traumatizing. And what a better time now than to really become a trauma-informed school is important.
And we actually have
for all
had two
students.
comments. Yeah, two comments come in right as we were talking about this. One is, aren't there ways to respond in a trauma-informed way without knowing the details of the trauma? And the second was, sometimes the parents and child don't even realize what the triggers are. And I think they go very well together. So if I'm a parent and we're seeing behaviors, and I don't want to tell the school, is there something a parent can say, like, hey, we've got some stuff here? Or how do we cue the school? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm really glad the person brought that up in the chat. And Tricia is correct. You can become a trauma-informed school, and there are many ways to get that information. And maybe I should have elaborated, because it doesn't just have to be, I have to go to the counselor and tell them everything that's happened in my life. No, you don't have to do that unless you feel comfortable doing that, by all means. But there are other ways. And oftentimes there's a good, again, going back to what we talked about earlier in the presentation, that need, if you will, to have that comprehensive view, meaning, are there others that are in the child's life that bring information to the table, whether it's in the form of a psych report, if it's in the form of some testing, there's lots of rich ways that we can gather that information. My whole point is, we have to look at the whole child and all of that information. That's where I was coming from.
Well, and it took us a while to figure out that his need was to be safe. Like, we all scratched our heads for quite a while. And then when he said, well, I'm not safe, we all went, oh, like it wasn't obvious until later. And I can only tell you in hindsight that we know that. We didn't at the time. But once we figured it out, and he cued us, like, he found his safe people and he would go to them over and over again. Oh, like, I think sometimes we were the slowest people in the room. That was the adults trying to figure it out.
Well, and someone I think put in the chat asking about, well, what if we don't know what the triggers are? And I would like Audrey to just kind of elaborate on that, because that is something you hear a lot. I don't know why they're doing it.
So part of that information is going to come through the data that you gather. That'll help illuminate what some of those antecedents or potential triggers are. But you don't have to share all the intimate details of a trauma. That's trauma, retriggering and traumatizing in and of itself. And so if you know that a student maybe has a history of trauma, and even if you don't, because I believe the latest statistic I read that was that in children that exhibit challenging behavior, around 50% of those students or children have already had 4 or more ACEs at that point in their life. So best practice would be to just assume that there might be some ACEs. You have 50-50 shot that the child that you're working with in that team. Yeah.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to beat you to it, Laura. What's ACEs?
Thank you. So ACEs is adverse childhood experiences. Those are some potentially traumatizing and adverse experiences that could impact that student or child, right? And so if we have, as a team, we're knowing as a school team, as parents and part of this team, we know that there's 50-50 chance that this individual has already experienced some traumatizing events or experiences. We should probably just be practicing some trauma-informed practices to begin with. And without turning this into a trauma-informed practices panel, some of those things, and a huge one as you're creating a behavior intervention plan, is focusing on proactive supportive strategies, creating a sense of safety and security in the environment, having a really building rapport and relationships with that individual, and focusing on preventing and meeting those needs. So that need for safety or escape ahead of time, as opposed to being a little reactionary and waiting for something to happen and then responding. So those are 3 main things, without going into a trauma-informed training, that a team could consider and do.
And I think it's important that know that, trauma comes in all shapes and sizes. The ACEs are a group of very specific traumas. And they're big and they're hairy and they can cause a lot of damage as an adverse childhood experience. However, there are so many things that don't hit that list that could also be going on. So as long as we're careful not to look at ACEs as the only thing that is going to be, looked at, because, death of a childhood pet is a trauma. It's not going to show up on ACEs per se. Yes. So family members moving away could be a trauma. So we just need to, as long as we're aware that trauma is bigger than any specific list, and anything that has been done to a child, it can be how they processed an exam, an experience. Exactly. I think that is an important thing for us to know when we're, and not turning this into a trauma panel. That's for another day. We actually had one yesterday, but that's all. Trauma in the school is like a whole other one. But I think that families need to know that it's okay to honor the trauma that they see in their families. It doesn't have to be someone else's definition that they need to meet. So.
And Laura, I'm going to just birdwalk for just a brief second, and then I'll turn it back over to Audrey. But I want to follow up on something that Tricia said in terms of trauma in the pandemic, and that's real. And I think it's going to take us years, quite honestly, to figure out the impact the pandemic has had, not only on our students, but on the adults as well. I was just having a conversation this morning with some directors around the state, and they're numb, right? They're trying to figure this all out. So while this is not a discussion about the pandemic and the impact, but I just don't want us to overlook or forget about or lose sight of, if you will, the impact on all of us, because it truly is impacting everyone. So, but I'll get us back on, and I'll go ahead and ask that Audrey continue talking about the functional behavior assessment.
Yeah, so one of the other questions that is sometimes asked about the FBA is, well, if it results in one of these 4 main functions or purposes, how does that include and consider my child or the student's mental health concerns, right? Well, they're doing it for escape, but they might have all these other diagnoses that are affecting their desire or need for escape, like you talked about, Laura. Sure, your son was maybe doing it to escape the environment because he didn't feel safe, right? So part of our job and part of including that mental health concern is in the analysis and the planning piece. We don't just stop at, well, they're doing it for attention. There's still a little bit more data that we gather and questions that we ask regarding, well, why are they doing it for attention, right? Why does he need to escape the environment? Well, he doesn't feel safe. Great. How do we proactively provide that safety, in that sense of safety in his classroom ahead of time? How do we teach him an alternative safe place to go when he is feeling scared or anxious, right? And that's part of the individualized BIP, behavior intervention plan, the individualized planning that we do in that BIP plan. One of the things that I appreciate about an FEA, and actually initially kind of boiling it down to those 4 functions, is I think it empowers us to figure out how to change the environment. Sometimes when we say, well, they're doing it because they're ODD, that kind of leaves us paralyzed about what to do. Well, just because they're ODD doesn't mean that we can't do anything about it. There's still things we can do to support them and teach them, right? And so sometimes I think there's a little bit of a benefit in kind of illuminating that underlying reason, and then we include, let's say he does have ODD. That's going to be really important information to include in potentially some proactive strategies, like maybe how we approach him and ask him to do things, and maybe how we recognize when he does do things. Maybe he or she doesn't feel that the acknowledgement of a job well done is that rewarding or reinforcing. So we might not want to say, wow, Johnny, thanks for doing that. That's not going to feel good for somebody that has ODD. So those considerations are really included when we start to create that individualized planning, and when we dig a little bit deeper after we understand the reason why the person with the mental health challenge is engaging in some of those challenging behaviors.
And I think knowing that helps us as parents sit at the table and understand what we're trying to do, because I think it's hard when we have a very complex situation at home and we come into a room and a group of educators say, well, we have a list of 1 of 4 reasons it can be, and then we're going to be done. And you're like, if I had a list of 4 reasons, I mean, I'd be thrilled. But I think the disconnect is understanding that putting it in the correct bucket helps us start identifying what strategies to use, not as a way to pigeonhole my kid, but as a way for us to start tackling the problem in a concise fashion. That feels better than we oversimplified my kid. And so I would love it if we saw more of that type of thing communicated. Are we ready to go on to the cool cheat sheet, Charlie?
Sure. And here it is. And we have another quick guide for the functional behavior assessment. Again, just like I mentioned with behavior intervention plan, all the information that we've covered is in this 1-page document. So again, when you're getting ready to go to the school, potentially to work with and have an FBA process begin, you just might want to refresh your memory and go over this. Again, just a resource that's available to parents and all everybody. It's available to everybody.
So there's still a lot of stigma behind the idea of having a child with mental health diagnosis, especially a young child. Things like, oh, it's not possible to have a mental health diagnosis yet. They're not old enough for you to have broken them. I actually had that said to me. Well, thank you for that. So how do we move past that in this teaming process? When we have a lot of stakeholders at the table who have different feelings about mental health being at the cause of at the root of a problem. So what are our thoughts? We have, obviously we are close to the end of our time today. So we've talked a lot about this. I think the thing to me that I would like to see is that every parent knows that they are the expert on their child at the school. Not when they walk in the door and they sit at that table, they're the ones who know their kid best. However, caveat, the educators in the room are likely to know how their kid behaves best at school. And so we need to be able to have that conversation openly. You know, my kid could be a saint at home and launch things off the roof at school. And I'm going to have less perspective on why that's going on, though I will know my child at their core more completely. I spend more time with them. So, Tricia, what are your thoughts here?
I think there's times that you just have to educate people, and that my experience is that the team wants to learn. So if you have an experience where the team is resistant, it just, when you barge in and you say ... that's not a teaming approach. You come in and you say, do you understand this? This is my experience with my child. This is what the professionals and I have determined, and this is what we find to be more effective. And so having a conversation, not in an authoritative way, but a teaming way, is most helpful, because the minute you come in and say, you need to understand this, you got people on the defensive. And so, those psychological reports and things like that are helpful because they give power behind it. But also just as a parent saying, I want you to really understand this, because you have a label, but that label on my child may look different than in the textbook. And so, I find that teams want to understand, and it may be overwhelming. It may just be completely overwhelming to them. But when you do it graciously, I think they respond better.
And I also think that it's important for parents to understand when they're having these sharing moments with a team, our educators are really amazing working with kids. They didn't go into this because they didn't like kids. They didn't go into this for power and glory. They went in this to make things better and to help children and to interact with families. And that's really what they're here for. Also, when we're sharing this information, we've known it. I mean, even at least before the meeting, we knew it. And we knew what was going on with our kid. And sometimes we're sharing brand new information with the people at this school. And we had time to process it and ask questions. And I think sometimes we forget that they also need time to process it and ask questions. I mean, telling the school, my kid doesn't feel safe at school. Well, we do everything we can to keep him safe. Agreed. This isn't about you keeping him safe. This is about how his mental health leaves him feeling unsafe. So I think that giving everyone a little grace to kind of process what we're telling them, that's important. And
we have a comment from the audience that says, I'd also like to say that you can include your child when possible, because you'd be surprised what you learn when they know they have a voice and share what they feel is not working. Now, my kids are reluctant sharers, but they will share. And I write it down in quotes. My child said, no more school, or no more recess, or no more whatever. And so I just take that as a quote and say, this is what, we had a conversation. This is what they shared. But as kids get older and you work with them that they can have a voice, bring them to the table, or at least for part of that IEP or that BIP, so that they can share their experience, and then they can leave, they can go back to what they were doing.
My son used to, when he got older, he would walk into the beginning of the meetings and he wouldn't even sit down. He would just stand at the end of the table and eyeball everyone and say, this plan you've got doesn't work, fix it. And he'd walk out the door and everyone would go, all right then. But he's like, I don't have time for adult meetings. You people are boring. And then he'd walk out the door. And okay.
Yeah,
and we are.
And I just really appreciate that the participant brought that up. That was really an oversight on all of our part, because anytime you should be getting that input from the child. And it does not have to be come to the table and sit at this table with a bunch of adults staring at you. That takes a pretty mature student. I mean, sometimes as adults, we don't like it, right? So I'm not sure why we would think a child would, but there are many ways though to capture and to get the voice of the child and bring that to the table. It could be having the child meet with the counselor or whomever they feel safe with at the school. Maybe it's the custodian custodian, maybe it's the secretary, but just any way you can get information from that child so that that can be brought to the table and built into whatever plan. And then the second thing I want to talk about, and Tricia, I really appreciate you saying, you don't want to set up an adversarial situation. I mean, we all, parents, educators, we all have to come to the table willing to listen, right? Because we all have something to contribute. And if we don't have something to contribute, then you really shouldn't be at the table. You really want to have those people that have something to contribute participating. And you have to remember, parents, that educators are people too. And sometimes when we have really complicated children that we're dealing with that have mental health and trauma and just lots and lots of challenges. It's scary. I mean, it's scary for the educators just as it might be scary for parents, because we've been taught, oh, we should know all the answers. We don't have all the answers. And sometimes for some people, that may be a little difficult to admit, to say, I'm kind of at a loss here. We need to, really bring everything together and maybe approach things differently. So, but if you set up that adversarial of, well, well, then people are plugging their ears. We all want to be heard. And we all have something to say. So just remember, yes, parents are without question the expert, but there are people at the table, like Laura mentioned, that may be the expert in being able to share what they're observing in the school environment. But we have to do it together.
Definitely do. So Tricia, can you introduce the concept of meaningful change?
Well, and that's just it. For my own personal experience, stable can be meaningful. So stable and not exhibiting behaviors can be meaningful. We want to see a reduction in the negative behaviors, but we also want to see an increase in the positive behaviors and the skills that are being taught. And so, we talk about extinguish a behavior. We're not always trying to extinguish that behavior. It's how can we give them a skill to meet that need? And so meaningful can be different for everyone. And so I think that we have to agree on what is it that we expect? What is it that we're trying to reduce? But more meaningfully, what do we want to increase? We want to see a more positive experience in getting their needs met. Laura had talked about this. The behavior doesn't have to get worse before it gets better when the team focuses on positive, effective behaviors and skills. So I would just want to talk about, when we use everyone in our toolbox to support this child. I've used a custodian to support a child. I have used kitchen staff to support a child. I have brought in volunteers who are retired teachers to support a child. We really need to think about matching what they need, match the students' need of the challenging behavior. And so with my kids and lots of kids that I dealt with, they just need things like, this is an example, they have a communication card. I, am frustrated and showing them we want the calm body. So how do we get from frustrated to calm? My kids I have 3 kids and we use this. They're called calming strategy cards. And so they have this access to them. So then they don't have to actually raise their hand and say, I need to go walk in the hallway. They can point to it to their staff member and say, I just need to take a break. My kids oftentimes use fidgets. And I tell them they need to have them on their desk and they need to have them available to them. So are we matching what they need to support them? That's really super important. My kids use take a break cards. They have communication cards. They have sensory chewables, just different things that, you really need to teach them skills, but oftentimes teaching them those skills is how can I get my needs met without being maladaptive? And I don't say it that way to my kids, but basically that's what it is.
So, I think that when we named this Beyond Sticker Charts and Treasure Boxes, and the reason we did is because the number of times we have had a plan presented to us as your child's going to earn stickers. And then when they've had 10 stickers, they get an award. And I'm like, my kid doesn't feel more safe because there's a sticker in it for them. And so, and I've had my kids say, Mom, I didn't earn my stickers, so I didn't get to go to recess, or I didn't get to participate anymore because I didn't have enough stickers. And as a parent, there's probably nothing that makes your head spin off your shoulders faster than your kid being penalized for being who they are, as opposed to being supported to being what we need. So, but then when Audrey talked to me about how sticker charts and treasure boxes can actually be useful, I went, once again, I wish it had been presented to me that way. So Audrey, could you explain sticker charts and treasure boxes to us so that we do not consider them the butt of every joke anymore?
I think we need to clone Audrey and just have her go to all the bit
I
agree.
Yeah, so sticker charts, token boards, these treasure boxes, they will not change behavior. The sticker in and of itself is not going to change any behavior. What does change behavior is what Trisha was talking about. We need to stay in thinking in the realm of teaching. How else can this student get their needs met, right? That is what's going to change behavior. And matching, oh, I have this need for attention. What's another more appropriate way I can get this need met? I have a need to escape because I'm really anxious or I don't feel safe. What's another way I can get that need met? Now, sticker charts, token boards, things like that can be a way to help provide feedback on how that skill is going, how we're doing teaching that skill, but the sticker alone is not going to change behavior. The token alone is not going to change that behavior. You could have the most powerful reward or sticker or pizza party or treasure in that treasure box. But if it's not tied to and doesn't include skills that we're building in the individual that's matched to their need, you're going to see really limited success.
And if the treasure box makes them feel worse about themselves than before, then maybe that's not the strategy we should be using.
Yeah, and when you're creating a program that might include as only one of the many components, a sticker chart or a token board, it's important to keep in mind that in the beginning, we might want to make it really easy for them to access that so they can feel that success, so they can see, hey, actually, I can do this and I can learn these things and I can do those things. And once they start to be successful and we're building those skills, well, then we can teach them more skills and we can kind of grow the criteria. We don't want to make it easy forever because we want all of our students to be as successful in as many different places and with as many different people as possible. But if we don't help them be successful to begin with, we're really not going to get very far. So,
well, and remember, the behavior plan is for how the adults are going to act and behave to help support the child. So if at the end of the day, the behavior plan doesn't work because the kid didn't earn a sticker, then maybe we didn't set up a plan for the adults. I have not seen a behavior plan for which the teachers or myself as a mom got a sticker every time I dropped the kid off in a good mood on the beginning of the day. Like, I don't get a sticker. If the plan is for how the adults are supposed to behave, we just have to remember that our eye's on the right prize and that our kids walk away feeling better. And by the way, I'm open for sticker charts for my good behavior anytime you would like to give them to me. I find them rewarding.
You get a gold star.
Well, I find coffee and chocolate rewarding. So, yeah.
Okay.
I'll give you my stickers.
Right. So we have just a quick minute here, but we have a couple of things that we need to talk about. This one, if we could just quickly kind of summarize what we do. I think we touched on this before.
Yeah, we already kind of talked about how we might want to consider trauma and trauma-informed classrooms and schools and planning. And the ultimate message is for meaningful behavior change, for long-term behavior change and success, we need to focus on preventative strategies. How are we going to set our student up for success? And we need to stay in the realm of teaching. How are we going to teach new behaviors, more adaptable, flexible, effective, and successful behaviors? So that's the ultimate message.
So Charlie, you have another quick guide.
Yep, and it speaks for itself. Again, it's just another resource available to anybody that has a need for it. So it is there. The next one I really want to go over just real quickly is here at SESTA, Special Education Support and Technical Assistance. They have been working really hard on creating a lot of resources for parents. And through the Idaho Training Clearinghouse, or the ITC, and you can see up on your screen, it's spelled out there, the Idaho Training Clearinghouse. If you go there and you go to topics, it may even be up today. I haven't had a chance to look this morning, but if not today, within the next week, we will have a parent section. So you just click on parents, and we will have, there are some short videos. There's a short video on what the heck is a plop? You know, I don't think this one's developed yet, but we'll have little videos on behavior resources, all kinds of things for parents as it relates to special education. And I just really want your folks, or all the folks participating in, and Laura, if you can get it out through the parent network, just to know that these are all available.
Yes.
So I wanted to say thank you guys for being willing to have this conversation. Obviously, my experiences with behavior plans have been less than stellar in the past, though I have had some educators who really did amazing things and they just didn't call it a behavior intervention plan. So I will give them a lot of credit for great work that they've done. And Trisha, I value your input as, you know, with the experience as a school counselor, the mythical unicorn that sometimes we feel that is in our school settings these days. I'm glad to actually put eyeballs on one. And it's just always, they're so spread thin. It's hard sometimes to track them down. So I'm glad to see you and all the school counselors out there who work so hard. And obviously, Audrey and Charlie, thank you for being part of today. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for helping demystify it for parents. I think we've just always felt a little on edge. And knowing what this tool is actually supposed to do for us, it's huge. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting us, and to all the participants, you know, feel free to reach out to myself or anybody on my team at the State Department of Education, or to go to SESTA. If you have questions, there's a help desk there. Use it. It's there for everyone.
Well, and schools can request help from SESTA. So thank you for that.
Yep.
So thank you, everybody. We're really looking forward to to getting in and digging into these resources later, Charlie. And as soon as I'm done with this presentation, I get to go talk to some more people on your staff. It's going to be great.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Nice job, guys.